Water rushed into Sophia's mouth as she gasped for breath in a panicked frenzy. Spitting the water out between exhales, she spun around in the water, hoping for some sign of life. But there was nothing. All that lay before her was the endless expanse of mirror-like water. The sky above her was a clear, bright blue, contrasting sharply with the dark water, but there was no sign of the sun anywhere. Looking down into the water, all that was visible was the surface. It wasn't dirty, just dark. In fact, the water was cleaner than any ocean she had ever seen. She was almost certain she was in an ocean, but something was wrong. Pumping some water into her hands, she was amazed at how pristine the water was. No gravel, no salt. The water even retained its dark color in her hands. As she let the water fall from her hands back into the ocean, she realized what was so different about this ocean. It was completely still. The water was glassy. No waves. She couldn't feel any movement in the water. No tides. No creatures. Most disturbing of all, it was completely silent. The silence was so complete and overwhelming that the resulting ringing in her ears was all she could hear. She tried to swim, and though she could move, she couldn't get a clear sense of which way she was going, or if she was moving at all. Then she felt something touch the bottom of her foot. It was so quick and short that she didn't have time to realize what it felt like. But she felt it. She almost jumped out of the water in terror. She couldn't even see her legs. The water was so dark. She splashed around, trying to swim as far and as fast as she could. Though it didn't touch her, the once quiet water churned beneath her. None of her senses could detect it, but whatever else was in the water was coming towards her. She screamed and immediately choked on a torrent of water. To her surprise, it didn't taste like salt water, nor did it taste like water at all. In fact, the water seemed to disappear the moment it hit her throat. Then, to her amazement, something appeared on the horizon as if out of thin air. It appeared to be a small island, a tiny brown speck in a sea of black. Confused, she rubbed the water from her eyes with her hands. The moment she took her hands away, she jumped back in shock. The tan spot now dominated the horizon line as if she were only a few hundred meters away, but it couldn't be that close now. There was no sign of it when she looked around a few seconds ago. There were no clouds or waves for it to hide behind. She had no time to think about it. She felt it brush against her foot again. This time it made contact long enough for her to notice something. Whatever it was had perfectly smooth skin. There were no scales or fins. In fact, she would have thought it was human skin if she hadn't known that was impossible. It didn't make any sense to her, but she wasn't going to stick around long enough to find out. Frantically kicking his feet, he swam towards the island. As she approached the island, she could hear sounds. But they weren't sounds she would expect to hear in this environment. They weren't waves or sea creatures, but rather spoken words. They sounded faint and muffled, and she couldn't make out what they were saying. Strangely, the words sounded as if they were right in her ears, even though there was no one around. Eventually she could make out the words being said, but they made no sense.
Do you think she's all right? Here, Jesse and Tyler, help me get her off the floor and onto the desk at least.
Can you feel her, Alexandria?
Not really feel her, but for some reason I can't stop thinking about her. This whole thing is stupid. How the hell are we going to drive her out of town with these useless powers?
The whole conversation, from several voices she was sure she recognized, continued as she swam to the island. It was as if she was in the room with them, but there was no sign of anyone in the water or on the shore of the island. She was about to call out to the island to make sure, when she felt her body rise in the water on the crest of a wave. Only it wasn't a wave. Something large had burst from the surface of the water. She didn't dare look behind her to see what it was. Instead, her gaze was drawn to its shadow. The shadow was long, piercing the horizon as it stretched endlessly. Not only was it large enough to engulf Sophia, but the entire island was now covered in its shadow. She squeezed her eyes shut in preparation for an impact, but there was nothing. When she opened her eyes, the shadow was still there, but the water was unnaturally calm again. She turned around in the water and opened her eyes. At first she saw nothing but the shadow, which was strange because she felt it was right on top of her when it burst out of the water. As her eyes traced the horizon, she saw the impossible. It was an arm, a human arm. Its dark skin clashed violently against the clear blue sky. What was impossible was its size. Even though it was clearly at the limit of their line of sight, it was gigantic. The monolithic gaze reached into the sky, touching the clouds if there had been any. The hand was open, the fingers outstretched as if reaching for something in the sky.
Hey, I think I can feel you guys.
The arm suddenly began to fall in Sophia's direction. As it fell, it seemed to expand towards her, extending the arm beyond normal proportions. Where at first it didn't look like it was going to come anywhere near her, now it looked like it was going to come right on top of her. She cried out in horror and closed her eyes again as it came crashing down on her. She twisted her body into a fetal position as it rocketed down into the depths. Her ears were filled with the roar of the ocean as her body was battered by the violent riptide. All she could do was duck her head into her knees, trying to brace herself for the impact. She felt her body plummet into the depths, not knowing when she would hit the ocean floor. Strangely, she didn't feel any water resistance as she fell. It felt like she was falling through air. Eventually, her body hit the ocean floor. She remained in the fetal position, expecting another impact. After a few seconds of tensing every muscle in her body, there was none. She lifted her head and at first thought she'd lost her sight. The wall of the abyss around her was so thick she could feel its opaque embrace. A faint light illuminated her body, as if emanating from it. However, the faint glow was only emanating from a few centimeters in front of her. She rolled over and turned in every direction, searching for any sign of life. The water that rushed into her mouth as she inhaled sent a shock of panic through her. But then the water dissipated in her throat and she was able to breathe. It wasn't air she was breathing, but water itself. Her lungs expanded painfully as they filled with the water, but expelled it as she exhaled. As she normalized her breathing, her bare feet took in the ground. The floor was soft, but at the same time completely solid. Looking down, she saw that the seabed was unlike any seabed she'd ever seen. It wasn't made of sand or mud as one would expect. Instead, it appeared to be made of a mass that was sinking under her weight. Upon closer inspection, large bulging ridges crisscrossed the landscape at random. To her disgust, they pulsed randomly like a vein. Stunned by the sight, she bent down and placed her hand on the surface. Despite its depth, the ground felt warm to the touch. As she did so, she felt the ground buckle beneath her. At the same time, the ground began to light up in a faint white glow in all directions. The glow and activity remained even when she released her hand. Then she felt the presence behind her again. It was impossibly large and she could feel its presence even though she couldn't see it. She was nothing but an ant to whatever it was. The water in her lungs seemed to freeze in her terror as she swam in the opposite direction. Her body propelled itself faster than any human could swim, the crisscrossing veins a blur as she moved. But it wasn't enough. The presence was still there. As she looked behind her for any sign of what was chasing her, her body collided with a wall. It wasn't made of stone, but it felt like it was made of flesh again. Without even bothering to see what it was, she sped off in another direction. After a few seconds, however, she collided with the fleshy wall again. Again and again, she sped off in different directions, only to be met by the same wall. Her mind froze in panic as she realized that the distance between the walls was shrinking, as if they were closing in on her. It was then that she finally glanced at the wall, illuminated by her faint glow. The wall was ridged with deep creases that ran the length of it. Fingerprints, she thought as she realized she was trapped between cupped hands. Suddenly, Her body was lifted off the ground in a current as the giant hands completed the trap and cupped her against their palms. When she calmed down, she was now resting on the hands. Before she could think, she was pinned to the ground as the hands rose upwards with tremendous speed. Water flooded her nostrils and eyes as she could do nothing but cling to the soft floor. The glow emanating from the floor faded, replaced by the crushing, oppressive darkness. Her body was thrown against the fleshy ceiling as the hands suddenly stopped. The cupped palms opened, but there was still no light, her glow being the only source. She felt the presence right in front of her. The water around her shifted as she came closer. Now that the hands had brought her up to its level, whatever this thing was now brought its head down to her hands. A dark semicircle slowly descended into her field of vision, like a photo-negative sunset. The chin, she thought. It continued to fall, revealing a large chasm that stretched for what seemed like meters in both directions. The mouth. Each end of the mouth curved upwards in a mad smile. The mouth passed out of sight beneath the palms as she was almost struck by a fleshy protrusion that brushed against the palms on which she rested. That was his nose. She dreaded what she knew was coming next. The fleshy protuberance gave way to reveal a cavity. She knew it was the eye socket, but she couldn't see the eye yet. Even considering the size of this creature, the eyes were far too large for its face, and all she could see was the abyss of its eyes. It leaned closer and she was thrown back by a wave of water pressure as it blinked. When the water cleared, she looked up and was shocked to see herself. After a few seconds, she realized she was looking at her reflection. As she stepped back, she knew that its eye was looking at her. She felt a sense of vulnerability, as if it could see inside her. Then she felt the floor give way beneath her. She was thrown to the ground as the palms of her hands tilted upwards towards the pupil of the eye. She tried to swim out of the way, but she could not move. His eyes were a swirling vortex, funneling its depths into an even deeper abyss. Desperately, she tried to cling to the bottom, but there was nothing to hold on to. There was a split second of serene silence as the palms of her hands rose to their zenith, and then she fell into the abyss of its eye.
If you have watched the video so far and liked it, please do not forget to subscribe to my video and turn on notifications